Hello everybody and welcome back to this tutorial. And right now, as I said, what we're going to do is we're going to code a simple TCP server and TCP client that are going to be able to send messages indefinitely. Now what I mean by that is we're going to code a while true loop that is going to basically go between the send and receive functions on both sides. So let us open up our idle, and what we are going to do is we are first of all going to create a TCP server code simply just by going right here, new file, because we are going to write a file and save it onto your desktop. Okay, so go on to the save, go to the desktop and call it, for example, tcp_server.py. Press here enter. Now we have the actual server onto the desktop, as we can see right here. And right now, let us continue with our coding. So first of all, we're going to import two libraries. Both of those we actually used. One of them is, of course, the socket library. So we will import the socket, and we are going to import the datetime library. So we can actually use the time where we actually connected to the server, send messages, and so on and so on. So let us just type here from datetime, import datetime. So basically we are importing the datetime module or datetime class from the datetime module. And right now we can continue coding our server. So in the previous video we saw that we actually defined the IP address and the port within the function itself, within the bind function. And right now we're going to put those two values into a variable. So we'll just type here host, which is going to be our server IP address, or basically the IP address of our own machine. Because we are running this basically on the same machine, we are going to check out our IP address, go down here, specify CMD. Once the command prompt opens up, you simply just type here ipconfig, and the output will be stored in the IPv4 address parameter, as we can see right here. It might be different for you. Now, it will most likely start with these three values right here, but if it doesn't, don't worry, there are different formats of IPv4 addresses. This is a local IP address, so we will just simply remember this, which is 192.168.1.4, and then we will specify between the double quotes 192.168.1.4. Okay, the next actual variable that we want to have is the port number. So port will be equal to the actual port that we want. So in the previous video, what we did is we specify a port 50,005, and right now let's say we choose the port 6789, which is the port that we're going to use right now. And also let us take a look at the third actual variable, which is going to be the amount of bytes that we want to receive, or the maximum amount of bytes that we want to receive. So in order to do that, we can simply just type here max_size, which is going to be equal to 1024 bytes. So if we receive anything larger than that, our programs will most likely crash. Therefore, we set the maximum size to be equal to 1024 bytes. Okay, right after we defined all of our variables, we can simply print right here. So print starting the server at, and then we will simply just use time in order to specify the actual time that we started our server at, date time. And then we will use a function that we covered in the previous tutorials, which is the datetime now. You can simply just find it right here. For some reason I can't really find it right here, but we will simply just call it just like that. We will call the now function, which will print the current time of the running of the server, and then afterwards we can print that we are waiting for the incoming connection from client. Okay, so right after we print this, we can actually create the socket object and perform the byte function as well as the listen function. But let me just go right here. We will actually code it in between these two actual statements. So first of all, we will create the socket object right here. We'll call it sock. It will be equal to socket.socket. Now we already discussed this in the previous tutorial. All we need to specify right here is the AF_INET, which stands for the IPv4 connection, and we also need to specify sock_stream, which stands for connection oriented connection or the TCP connection. So socket.socket and then socket.afinet as the first argument, and then socket.sock_stream as the second argument. So we actually set up our socket object. All we need to do is bind our ports, and we can do simply just by specifying sock.bind, open and close double brackets, remember, not single brackets, otherwise this will not work. And all we need to specify right here is the IP address and the port, and we can simply just specify them with the variable name, so host, port. Okay, and then we'll print starting the server at date time now, which will print the current time. Then we will actually print waiting for the incoming connection, and then we will call the sock.listen function, which will listen for the incoming connections, and we will specify right here that we want to listen for 5 connections, okay? Even though we will only be accepting 1, but we will type here that we want to listen for 5 connections. And then afterwards we will simply just call the accept function, which, as you remember, it will store 2 values. One of the values will be the socket object for the client, and the other value will be the actual address, the IP address, and the port from which the client has connected to or connected from. We can specify that by storing the values into different variables. First one will be the one that is going to store the socket object, and it is going to be called client. And the second one we will just call the ADDR, which stands for shortly address, and then we will put it to be equal to sock.accept. Okay, so this is already something that we did in the previous tutorial, nothing really new for us. Let us save this before we actually continue, and we are going to right now, let me close this, I will open my idle, and we will open a new program, so new file. We will close this one as well. We will save it first of all, and we will save it onto the desktop. Make sure that you put them in the same directory, even though it doesn't really matter right here, but if you want to put them so you have them at one place. And we will call this one tcp_client.py. Save. And right now all we need to do is perform the actual connect function and creation of socket object in order to be connected to the server. But first of all, let us import socket. And let us also import datetime class from the datetime module. So from datetime, import datetime. We will set the host variable to be equal to the same IP address, so 192.168.1.4, and we will also set the port to be equal to the same port as we specified right here in the actual server-side code. So it is the port 6789. Press here enter, and the max size will be equal to the same max size that we specified in the server-side code, so it will be 1024 bytes. Okay, so basically right now that we define the actual variables that we need, oops, I'm missing an equal sign right here. Okay, now it is good, and now we can print that the client is starting. Okay, so starting the client at, and then we will simply just add the datetime.now, which will print the current time of running of this program, and then we will create the socket object. Because we called it right here sock, we will simply just call here s, so s equals, I mean, you can call it the same name if you want to as we did in the server-side code, but let's differentiate them and actually use a different name. So we'll just specify here as for socket object, and it will be equal to socket.socket, socket.af_inet, comma, socket.sock_stream. Okay, press here enter, and all we need to do, or all we're left to do in order to perform the connection between these two machines, we need to simply just type s.connect, open and close double brackets, so make sure that you open and close double brackets as we did in the bind function, and simply specify host, port. Okay, so right after it we can save this, and let us actually try to run this. First of all, we will run this server, run. Let me first see if we saved it, so save, and then run module. you can see starting the server at this time right here, waiting for the incoming connection from client. And now this will hang right here because it is stuck at this line right here, waiting for someone to accept the connection. Now let me just go right here, find the actual window of the server, or pardon me, of the client, and put the server right here so we can see both of those at the same time. And right now, as soon as we actually run the client, the programs, or the both programs, will close. So run module, we can see we actually ran the client, both of those programs have finished, as we can see, waiting for the incoming connection for client. It is no longer hanging at the connection, and here it printed out starting the client at this time, and it then closed the program. So we successfully were able to establish the connection, and right now what we want to do is we want to simply enter the while true loop in order to be able to receive and send messages. Okay, so first of all I will put these actual windows to be smaller so we can see them both. Just like this. Enlarge this one as well. Okay, and let us continue with our server-side code. So right now that we actually accepted the connection, let us enter the while true loop. We know how to do that. We simply just specify while true, and anything we execute right here will be executed indefinitely unless we actually close the program. So the first thing that we are going to receive, or that we are going to actually do, is, let's say that the data for the server, or in this case, in the previous case, the server actually sent the message first, but right now let's say that the server needs to receive the message as soon as the client connects. So in order for server to receive the message, we simply need to specify from which socket object are we receiving the message. And we want to receive the message from this socket object that we stored in the client variable, so we'll simply just specify client.receive. And the amount of bytes that we want to actually receive from the client is stored in the max size variable, so we'll just simply type here max_size. Okay, now that we did that, we need to actually decode this data right here, because the server actually sent and encode data, so we'll just simply type here print at, and then the actual time, so at datetime dot now, and then address, and the address, just to remind you, the address is an actual IP address of the client, also the port from which the client has performed the connection from. So what we will do is we will simply just print out right here at a certain time from this IP address and port this address said, and then we will just type here data.decode, and we will decode it with the UTF-8. Let me just put this right here so we can see everything. Okay, so press here enter. And basically, once we actually type this, we will right away prompt into an actual input message. So we will just type here message to client is going to be equal to input, enter message to client. And then we're going to send the encoded message. So first of all, we will encode it, message to client encoded will be equal to message to client.encode with the UTF-8. So UTF-8 will specify it like this, and all we want to do is simply just type client.send .send, and we want to send the message to client encoded. So we are sending an encoded message, and as soon as we do that, we're going to go at the beginning of the while true loop, and we will go to the beginning, which is the data that is going to be received once again. As we can see, we are going to once again receive the data print it right here, then go to the input message, and then we will once again send the message to the client. Okay? So right here, let us code right here the while true loop that is going to be correspondent, or that is going to fulfill this server-side while true loop the same way. So we'll just type here while true. And because the actual server was the first one to receive the message, then the client has to be the first one to actually send the message. So therefore we will just type here message to server equals input enter message to server. Simple as that. We will just prompt the user to send the message to server, and then we will send the encoded version of this message. So first of all, message underscore to underscore server underscore encoded will be equal to message to server dot encode. And we will of course once again encode it with the UTF, so simply just specify here UTF-8, and then we can send this message to the server and proceed to receiving the message from the server. So in order to send the message, we will simply just type here s.send, and then we will send this message, so message to server encoded. Okay, so right now this actual line right here is corresponding to this line right here. Let me just find it right here. Okay, and once it actually receives the message, it will print the message with this line, and then it will prompt the server for the input of the message to the client, and then we will send the message to the client. Therefore, right now here we need to receive the message. So the data will be equal to s.receive, and we want to receive everything of the max underscore size, which is 1024 bytes, and then we want to print the decoded version of this data. Okay, since the server side encoded and then sent, we right here need to decode it. So we will decode it just like this, print at, oops, and then at datetime.now, someone or server replied with data.decode UTF-8. Okay, so we will print that, and basically that is the end of the while true loop for both the server and the client. Now at the end of the program we of course need to call the close function, so we will close the socket object right here, as well as we will close the socket object right here, so sock.close. But first of all, we'll just type here client.close, and then sock.close. Right now, let us save both of these files, so click here, save. I will go right here and save this one as well. And first of all, we will run the server, so we will be stuck at this line right here. It will print these two values, and it will be stuck right here until we run the actual client, then it will enter the while true loop. So first of all, we run this, oops, run. As we can see, it ran the program. Right now, let me just close this. Right now, let's say we run this part, and you can see that we get prompted enter message to server. So we type here hello server, press here enter, and you can see that it says right here, just it actually split it up because we have a small screen. Let me just go right here. You can see if we enlarge this, it will say at this certain time, this date, this time, the actual IP address of 192.168.1.4 from the port 53543 said hello server. And then we get prompted back message to client. You will notice that this program still hasn't finished running because we're in the while true loop and waiting for the message. And we can type here hello client. Press here enter, and you will see that right now the client prints out at this time server replied with hello client. So what we have right here is a simple version of a chat program. So we can just type here how are you today server, and then it will get printed out at the server side of the code. Now note one thing is that these two programs can be ran from totally separate machines as long as you specify the correct IP addresses. Now it can also be ran from another continent to a different continent as long as you specify a different IP address and you perform the port forwarding, or you have some other actual program that will perform the port forwarding for you. Okay, for now on it will only work on the local network if you specify the local IP address which is given to you by your router. This IP address of course does not work to connect from outside of your network. So you can just type here I am fine, how about you, and you will see that we can exchange for as long as we want. But one thing you might notice right here is that we can't really close this program. There is no other way except keyboard interrupt, as we can see right here. Oops, right here, and then right here. Oops, what am I doing? Yeah, right here it can't really even perform the keyboard interrupt because we're actually in the receive function itself trying to receive the messages. Therefore, we need to do something about that so we can actually close the programs correctly. Now, in order to close the programs correctly, we can simply just write a simple if statement that is going to check for a specific message which will indicate the closing of the connection. And how we will do that is we will simply specify if a certain message was equal to, for example, exit, we will exit this while true loop, leading us to these two actual executions which will close the socket and close the connection. Okay, so right here, we'll simply just, after we receive the data, we'll simply just check if data dot decode UTF-8 equals to, let's say, Q. Let's say Q stands for quit, and if the actual client says Q, it means that they want to terminate the connection. Therefore, we will break out of this loop if that is the case. If that is not the case, we will print this and continue executing these other things, as well as going back to the beginning of the loop. Now we also need to perform the same thing right here. Let us just see where do we have to perform this. We have to perform it right after we receive the actual data, so right here. If the receiving, if data underscore dot decode UTF-8 is equal to Q, we want to break out of this loop as well, leading us to close the connection. So let me just check out right here. There are two parts where we need to implement this. We also need to implement it right here, because if you notice, let's say that the server is the one that actually sends the Q message. It will go through here. This will not be executed because the message was not Q, let's say. Then it will go through here and it will input a message of Q. Then we will send that to the actual server. And then we will go to the beginning of the while true loop. Then we will get stuck at this line because the server actually received this message of Q and it broke out of this while true loop, closing its program, and therefore we are going to be stuck right here without ever receiving anything back. So we need to double check everything, and by double check I mean right here if message to client is equal. Now we are not using message to client encoded, we want to simply just check the raw string which is received from this statement right here. If the message to client is equal to Q, break out of the connection or break out of the while true loop. Now make sure that this statement is written after you send the actual message, because if this is Q and then right after it, once you specify Q to this message, you break out of the loop, it will never get sent to the client, and therefore the client then will not know whether it should terminate the connection or not. Okay, so same thing goes right here. Let me just see if the message to server equals to input, if the message to server encoded, message to server encode, then we send that. And then before we try to receive, we will just check if message to server is equal to Q. If it is, we will once again break out of the loop. So right now let us save these two programs. File, save, file, save. We will run the server first, run it, waiting for the incoming connection from the client. Okay, good. And then we run this one as well. Enter message to server. So right now let us first of all try to exchange a few messages. For example, hello. It gets printed out right here. Hello there. How are you today? Good. Doesn't even matter, we will just send good. Okay, then bye. And then this sends Q. Hello everybody, sorry but my actual PC crashed and now I had to restart it, and now we will continue from where we stopped. So basically we have our TCP server and TCP client. Let us open both of those codes right here. Oops, let me just open it with the edit with idle. Let's try to edit with idle to see what it will open up. Okay, so here is our good usual server-side code. Now we also need to open the TCP client, which is the client-side code, and right now let me just put them side by side so we can see both of them as we execute them. Now we just need to test out the actual queue option to see whether it does perform well. So all we need to do is just simply click run module onto the server. As we can see, the requested address is not valid in its context. Okay, well probably since I restarted the PC it did change the actual IP address, therefore I'm going to check out for the new IP address, which right now is 192.168.1.5. So let us change the IP address from 192.168.1.4, as we can see it's specified right here, to .1.5. So let's first of all go right here, press here 5, and do the same right here. Let's save both of the programs. Now make sure that even if you also get the same error, check out once again for your IP address, because it might have changed. If you don't have a static local IP address, it can change from time to time, and it will change from time to time, especially if you connect to a different network and then you try to run this program and you get an error. Always make sure that you have the correct IP address specified. Okay, so right now we will run the module. As we can see, there is no longer an error. We are running this, waiting for the incoming connection from the client. Let me just lower this so we can run this one as well. Run client, and now we have the connection opened. Okay, so now the server is waiting for the message. We specify here hello, it gets received back. We specify here hello back, and the client also gets the message back. Now let's say the client is the one that wants to quit the messages. The client can simply specify Q, and you can see both programs close without any errors. Now it goes both ways, so let us run once again both of them. So we can now specify that the server will try to quit the connection, and then they will both close once again. Run module right here. We specify hello from the client, hello, and let's say the server doesn't want to talk anymore and presses Q. You can see both actual programs terminate and close correctly. So that is something we wanted. Now that we got that out of the way, you can implement different things to these programs if you really want to. Such as, for example, if you want to execute something on the target machine, you want to create a file, you want something that is more SSH-like, for example, executing or navigating through different systems in the actual or on the actual different machine. Basically, once you log in to SSH, you can execute different commands on a different machine that can be all around the globe. And right now, you can implement the same thing right here. So, in order to implement something like that, you would probably use something like the OS library. Now, we will not do that because there is no really point. We did cover the OS library in great detail. you know how to change directories, you know how to navigate with system through the OS library, you know how to check whether a file exists. You can implement all of that code in the while true loop. So the example would be something like if data that is received, or data.decode UTF-8, and then we know that in the actual Python, let me just type right here, starts with, or is that the name of the actual function? Yeah, I'm not really sure if it is called like this, but you know that starts with function that we actually covered. You can use it, or you can simply just use something like this. If the first two characters from the data decode of the UTF-8 are equal to CD, then you can simply just os.change directory from the data.decode, and then in between the brackets we specify UTF-8, and then we specify that we want to change the actual directory to everything specified from third character onwards, or from second character onwards. Let me just see right here. Let's just leave it for third, because let me show you what I did right here. Let's say you want to change the directory on the different machine that you are actually using as a client. You type the command that looks something like this. So for example, cd desktop stands for change desktop. This is the command, and what we did right here, first of all, don't actually forget to import the OS library, otherwise this will give you an error, because os.change directory doesn't really exist without the OS library. And let's say the client actually sends this message to the server. It wants to change the actual directory on the server. So it sends the messages that looks like this. What we do right here is we check if this message, if the first two characters of this message are equal to CD, as we can see right here. Then we will proceed to perform this stuff right here, which means if the CD is the first two characters, it means that the client wants to change the directory on the server. Then we proceed to change the directory to the actual environment, or to the actual directory that is named from the third character of this message onwards, because the first two characters will be CD, then the third character will be an empty character because you need to type a space, and everything after it will be the name of the directory that you want to change the directory to. Therefore, right here we specify from the third character onwards. So that is how you can actually combine different things that we learned and implement them wherever you want. This is just some of the example. Now we will not really do that, doesn't even matter. You can also implement different things if you want to. You can execute different stuff. For example, let's say we want to start a notepad on the actual on the target machine. You can simply just type here if on the different machine. You can simply just type here if data.decode UTF-8 equals to, for example, start. Now you need to specify different commands, because all of these commands will have their own meaning. You can name them anything you want. For example, if you send in the chat server start, then what this will do is it can perform the subprocess function, so subprocess.popen, and it can open the actual notepad, for example, and then let's say it opens the notepad and shell equals true. Of course, we need to make sure that that is right here as well. So basically it would look something like this. Now of course I would probably get some error right here because I forgot something, but if something like this is called, you can implement everything that we learned in the previous tutorials. You can also implement anything that we did with the time itself if you want to. You can list different directories, you can execute different commands, such as, for example, let's say print datetime. We can do anything like that. Well, basically there really isn't much to do at this actual message and clients or server and client programs. What we did right here, we simply created a normal program that will send and receive messages from the both sides. So basically that would be about it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I will see you in the next one. Bye.